Okay, welcome to a new episode of the podcast Confessions. Today I'm speaking to an activist based in Ljubljana, Slovenia. Her name is Tonja Jerele, and she is the coordinator of a research-based activist group called Rezistenca. The group has been active since late 2019 and they're working on topics such as addressing the issue of sexual harassment in higher education. Tonja, thank you for speaking with me in this podcast, and I'm sure we're going to address some topics that are highly important not only for the society in the country you're in, but also for the society in general in the countries of the Western Balkans. So thank you.
Thank you, Hana, for inviting me.
I would like us to begin with you helping me and the people who will be watching this understand the public discourse in Slovenia. When looking from the perspective of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is a daily chaotic country, Slovenia acts as a fairly orderly state. I am aware that this might be like a superficial perception since I have no in-depth knowledge of the situation. So I would like to hear, in relation to your activist experience, how are feminist issues treated in public space in Slovenia?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, from the perspective of Bosnia, we do look like a more well put together country, though many of that has changed during the past government and during the COVID crisis. But in general, I would say like Slovenia has entered this stage of what I call institutional post-feminism, where it's not generally looked down upon, but we have come to believe that we've done enough. And so this isn't a topic that's given a lot of priority. And usually when we do speak about it, oftentimes it's instrumentalized in political agendas. For instance, recently we had a very big scandal about sexual violence in sort of these art circles and everything. And it was talked about a lot also by politicians, but because they had an agenda, because they wanted to frame someone. And so oftentimes when we make progress, it's because someone else had an agenda that aligned with what we're trying to do. Generally, we believe that we're a very open society, that we've already, addressed many of the issues, but I think it's mostly due to the fact that we're not looking anymore.
Yes, it kind of relates actually to a wider context, because here as well, when we speak about gender equality or issues related to women, what I get as a feedback very often is, okay, but what else do you want? You have the right to work, you have the right to vote. What else in the world could you wish for? So yes, I think that that's something that's in common, this perception that, after so many years, women have some basic human rights, and this is where we should stop, because everything above that might be a problem for the society.
Yeah, it's perceived as if now women are taking the upper hand, like, no, this is now discrimination against men or something. And I think the problem is that they think that just like if we do something pro forma, just because, I don't know, we have this legislation, we have these rights, that it also works. And most of the time what we're realizing is that the systems don't work. The system that should protect, I don't know, victims of violence, of assault and everything don't really work. Our for instance, judicial system is very slow. There's a lot of re-traumatization. Usually the cases go nowhere. They're getting dragged for years in courts. So women don't really want to
to put themselves through that experience. Yes, that's completely understandable. Sometimes it's easier not to report on such cases than to willingly go through this. It's the same here, through the slow system, through this, being out there as someone who actually fights for your own rights and doesn't really get the support of the system through the process.
Usually they are the ones that get the shorter end, especially if it comes, in the media. Then the media is always questioning the story, victim blaming, in the end, all the consequences are felt by those who have been wronged and assaulted, not those who have actually done the assaulting. And this is a big problem, especially with media reporting. As we have seen recently in this scandal, everything gets dramatized, everything gets sensationalized in a way that is really detrimental to the cause, to trying to actually address violence, And for instance, on our national TV, that is very much subject to sort of political pressures from the former, there's a lot of people still that were giving positions not due to their expertise, but due to their political alliances. And this is sort of a leftover from the former government, but they were trying to instrumentalize this story, and even on their prime time moment in their show, the first 15 minutes were given to the accused to explain how wronged he feels, how lonely he is, and everything, And it's this is we cannot do this. We cannot give the assault, the perpetrator, prime time spot to explain his actions, and that's also how the public opinion shifted to saying maybe the women are overreacting.
Yeah, I completely understand. There has also been a discussion here because when it comes to cases of men killing their partners, killing women, their ex-partners, or whatever the relationship is, what we get through media reporting very often is statements from the neighbors saying he was an amazing man and the relationship looked so beautiful. He never had any problems. And we always somehow managed to create a public opinion of the guy who was a perfectly great partner, and then just one day he decided to kill his wife. And we no longer speak about the woman. We no longer speak about the act itself. We only hear about the explanations why we should not be thinking about him as a killer. We should be looking at him like a guy, he had a bad day or something, which is absolutely unacceptable, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the same. It was really fascinating to me. This year in Slovenia, there was an above-average rate of femicides, right? And even during this scandal, which happened in summer, it was a long-lasting. It went on for weeks and still not quite finished. And we're talking about this, with Rezistenca, we did a protest addressing this. We sent a letter to the media. We're it is also your responsibility and your duty to report better, to do better on these topics. And again, a femicide happened during this time. And again, the same thing, we had articles saying, oh, but he was such a great guy. And I think this is also part of this sort of institutional post-feminism, because we're not talking about male violence anymore. We're not really addressing it, Maybe they were both at fault. Maybe, we have to reach equality of both sexes. No. We have not actually solved anything yet. We still need to talk about women. We need to talk about, sex-based violence and these topics, because obviously we had not resolved it. We have not addressed it as it should be. And for me, this scandal, I love it. It was the perfect scandal to really show how the systems aren't working, The police was very slow, the media went off the rails, but what for me was most fascinating, that it uncovered all of these patriarchal structures that still exist just above this sort of feeling that we have about society, the feeling that we have that everything's okay, but just below it, the structures remained the same, The perpetrators were men in positions of relative power within their own circles, connected to other men in positions of power, one sort of having the back of another, keeping each other safe and secure in this world. And they were even connected to some perpetrators from when we were doing research into the university, and it just showed how even the structures we think are most progressive, like the art scene or the university, are still drenched in patriarchy.
Yeah, exactly. We will, through our conversation, I'd like us to go back to how to actually nurture this fight through time that passes. But what I would also like to speak to you about is that while researching you, I found that one of the topics you're actively working on is actually related to women's reproductive rights. And then I read the article you wrote about living with polycystic ovary syndrome, which is obviously an exclusive female diagnosis. And it's still, from my own experience speaking, at least from the context I live in, it seems not to be important enough to doctors and to medicine in general for them to identify very specific causes and very specific treatment. So it's very interesting for me to observe how many of these diseases which are specific to women, especially when it comes to the reproductive system, are not scientific priorities. We have so much of these rallies when it comes to, for example, the right to abortion. We have so many men interfering into this part of women's life, and yet when it comes to women being able to be healthy, in this sense, it isn't a topic for anyone. So is there something we can do in that regard?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think if maybe I take a step back, I think that when we talk about when you said like men are speaking about abortion but not about health, it's because it's not really about women. It's about control, it's about power. It's not about actually women, but it's about control. It's sort of this border issue. It's sort of a place of of like social battles, and also it relates back to like this medicinal issue, because they only care about women's health up until the point of getting answered to the question of, can you give birth? So like, if you cannot give birth, okay, we need to address this. But if you're able to give birth, who cares? I was even actually yesterday I was visiting my gynecologist, and she said, well, if women with PCOS don't have any clinical signs that should be treated, I don't even tell them that they have it. And it was really interesting for me coming from a woman, because I think like we should have information about our health to be sort of able to really have autonomy and agency about our own life. And in regards to what we can do about it, that's difficult. I think probably one of the main things is more women in medicine, because that's the point where things sort of started going, because we care about our own issues, men don't. It was really fascinating for me. In America they used to call sort of this like women's science just bikini science, because in their heads the only things that were different between our bodies are in the bikini parts. And they didn't ever bother to check, or they didn't want to do trials on women because we menstruate, and then the hormones, then they disrupt the clinical trials, which I don't know how that wasn't a sign that maybe, okay, so that's exactly why we should test this. But honestly, just greater involvement, greater access, which in this sort of system, it's difficult. I mean, even women who go into medicine, it's difficult to get to positions where you're even able to do this sort of research and trials, because even in medicine, women are often held back in the positions that sort of women are more likely to take, which is like, I don't know, pediatrist or something like that, But in order to get there, I think for most questions, this is a simple answer that we're not considering, is education. Like education is key to sort of disrupting these norms, these patriarchal patterns that we're caught in. Early education about sex, about gender norms, gender roles, and all of these topics, I think it's the only way to actually address all the different sort of inequalities in the society, especially pertaining to women. Because, you know, once they, like in our primary socialization, we get these patterns that we sort of carry with us throughout the life. And if we don't start addressing this, we're just going to keep on putting out fires.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. And I think what kind of confirms everything you spoke about is after the distribution of COVID-19 vaccines started, I know that, at least on social media, a lot of women were reporting that it kind of influenced their menstrual cycles, but it was not considered for a very long time by medicine, by scientists, as something that should be taken into consideration because, I mean, it's just women and it's just menstrual cycles. What kind of amazes me the most in this is this lack of curiosity. I mean, on a human level, I cannot understand this lack of curiosity of scientists, or does it, just simply disappear because we're speaking about women? I've also mentioned, as you've referred to in the beginning, the story of the right to abortion. For me, it seems kind of unnatural that it's still a topic. It's 2022. And I feel like it's something that the society as a whole should have overcome a long time ago, because it is a basic human right of choice that should be guaranteed to women. However, it is not the case, and it is in relation to other hot political topics. Here and there, it becomes something that is discussed among politicians and then accordingly among society as well. Now, why would you say this is continuously such an attractive political topic?
Yeah, I mean, as I've mentioned earlier, I think really it's because it's sort of on the one hand this cultural battle between the left and the right, like this is the sort of the border issue that is very sort of divided on partisan lines, if I may say so. And it's about control, it's about nationality, it's about all of these bigger ideas that sort of concentrate in the women's body, in the ability to reproduce, who reproduces, in what ways, like what nationality are the children, how, and, it's a way of putting women back into what is their place. It's about, power and control, like with most things. Yeah, on the one hand, I am shocked, like even in Slovenia, that this discourse has opened again when we have really a high approval of legal abortion. But it just goes to show that nothing is, like, progress isn't linear. We can't think of like how history goes, that it's linear. The next stage is always better than the one that came before, because all of this is always a sort of a battle of forces and about ideas on how we should organize society. And with the rise of this sort of right-wing populism, this us versus them, it only makes sense that abortion would become a hot topic, because it's about us, it's about how many of us, who reproduces, they are coming for our women. So women as a symbol of this sort of national identity and this sort of, I don't know, primal ownership, sense of ownership over the future, I guess, as well.
Yeah, and also always as an object rather than as a subject in making decisions. You mentioned you mentioned the far-right populism, and one of the things you do as well is that you fight against conservative extremism and the right. So this fight, in my perception at least, also implies the protection of women's rights. And then my question for you would be, what do you think that the future holds for women, but a kind of a future in which conservative extremism and right-wing ideologies would be the dominant social commitment.
Yeah, I don't think that's something we actually need to imagine anymore. I mean, we're basically there. Yeah, I will be honest. Like, I see where things are going. Like, even in Slovenia, for the past 2 years, we had an extreme right-wing government, and immediately, like, through the COVID, okay, I'm sorry, I forgot the word, but like through measures done to sort of curb the epidemic of COVID-19 in Slovenia, you could see that they were very much in line with how the right sees society, you know. You could, there was a curfew after 9, you could go to work, but you couldn't socialize. Everything was done in this sort of familial unit. We were sort of confined to the home, and even when we could leave, it was mostly to go to your parents or something. So this sort of familial care line, and this sort of unit of a man and a woman, sort of like this familial unit, very much heteronormative, of course, and I think, like, with the combination of this raging neoliberalism and this sort of push to privatize everything, I think, like, what's in store for us is, what we see in America, each on his own. You cannot survive without having a partner, which is honestly now in Ljubljana, even now, quite impossible, because, for instance, the prices of rent are exorbitant, and also in the direction of limiting the access to certain rights, especially abortion, contraception, and all of that.
Obviously, something that we live today is a lot closer to this to this concept I told you to think about. But if we'd imagine this society in which left would be the dominant social commitment, what would this mean for women?
Okay, yeah. I'm both critical of the left and of the right. I don't think any one of them really represents women more than what is practical, or what is deemed necessary, or what is socially gaining really a lot of attention and traction. It's hard for me to imagine the world in which the left has power, because it's so powerless currently. I mean, in Slovenia, they do have 2 ministries, but so far I haven't seen a lot of progress done on the topic of women's issues, because it's a ministry that also regulates labor, so that's a special topic. First and foremost, I think women need to step up for women, and then societies can change. We cannot think of the left as a savior, especially not one that is also drenched with its own issues when it comes to women. I mean, we know historically that that the left has considered women's rights sort of as disrupting the movement, as something that can be done after the revolution. And even when the revolutions came, women's rights and the position of women in society was never quite what it should be, and what a lot of women had believed it would be. And this is, like, Vida Tomšič here is a great example of someone who really believed that men and women together can form a better society, only to sort of reach this moment of disappointment and of recognizing that women need their own spaces, women need their own movements, their own conversations about how to sort of rearrange systems in society so that it would better fit them. And in this regard, I think it will only get better for women when we are the ones pushing for change, when we are the ones involved, when we have a voice. And to say that either the left or the right would do anything is to sort of be a little bit naive, in the sense of that patriarchy exists on both sides, as ridiculous as I usually find this argument of both sides. It just manifests differently. And the issue is what I've been mentioning before, that we're not actually having conversations on how to then also address these specific instantations that we see.
You've mentioned two things that I think we can use to kind of wrap up our conversation. One of them is that progress is not linear, and this is something that through my conversations with activists from different fields is, I think, a common conclusion. And I mean, it's on the other side, I guess it's a completely natural conclusion, that basically the fight never ends, and that rights that are once gained can very easily be lost if the fight is not continued. On the other side, you've also mentioned that you believe that more women need to step up for women, and that is one of the ways to achieve progress, and I completely agree with both things. So how would you say, considering all of this, that we can foster activism among young women, how to foster this understanding of all of the rights that belong to them, but also the skills to fight and achieve these rights when they're denied? And, you know, at some point you've also mentioned the systems which are pretty much similar around the region, and which are not very supportive in this path of trying to get back the rights someone took away from you. So all of this includes more patience, I guess, more activism, more of everything than, you know, normal measures with a supportive system would require.
Yeah, honestly, we come back to education, because what I've noticed, like even through my own activist sort of path, is the fact that it took up until me finishing my bachelor's degree to actually gain the knowledge of the history of women, of how some rights were gained, how they get lost, and to really gain this to really also learn why it is important to fight for them. And the thing is, we don't tell, not just women, anyone, we don't teach them about this path. We don't teach them about the importance of representation, of having women involved in politics, why this matters. And recently we had a project with the Women's Lobby, you know, about sort of educating the young on politics, on how the system works, and so on and so forth. And you know, this was the first time that they heard like how our system works, and how the elections work, how the parliament works, how the government works, and what is the role of women, or how many women are participating in something. And you know, they were time and again shocked of, you know, how this comes to be about the numbers of women participating, and that's because no one ever told them. No one tells them the importance of certain rights, of no one tells them how they were fought for, how the lives of women were before this, and no one also tells them that they can. You know, a big part of activism is this belief that you can change things, that the system isn't just as it is and there's nothing we can do about it, and that this is the natural order or state of things. Nothing about this is natural, all of it is socially constructed. And if we don't tell them what is the system, how it works, and that it can be changed, and that it is, you know, shaped by the people who are in it and who are working on it and who are participating in politics, then they will never, I mean, yeah, like we need to teach them these things, because then they can start imagining a different path, a different side, a different possibility. And one of the things is also just, what is the importance of politics? That everything is politics, that we're not in this post whatever society, but that like rent is a political issue, like the how much you pay for rent is a political issue, how much you pay for food is a political issue. It's not just freedom of choice, no, you choose this, you choose that. No, these are all systemic political issues that are getting addressed by those who are in politics. And in Slovenia, and I think everywhere else as well, politics have really gotten sort of a bad reputation, and honestly with reason, like as I think in Bosnia as well as in Slovenia, there's a lot of corruption. You see the politicians, they say one thing and then immediately they do another. Even our new government that made a lot of promises to civil society in their first month, they went back on several of those promises that they gave. But also it's that sort of state of thing exactly because people who have great ideas or who think differently don't get so involved. And I think really the key is education and telling young people that a different future is possible and that we can fight it for ourselves if we just start. And and I think that's sort of it, because if people don't believe that change is possible, then you're not gonna give up so much of your time, so much of your energy, sanity to some issues if you don't think you can get anywhere.
Absolutely true. I think that's something that has happened here where I live. But on the other side, I think you are completely right that knowledge brings both power and hope. So thank you, Tonja, for this conversation. I feel like, to begin with, I have a better picture of how things work in Slovenia, what are the priorities when it comes to fighting for women's rights. And I don't know, thank you for sharing your attitudes, experiences, and I'm sure I always like to think at the end of these conversations that they might motivate a person or two, or hopefully more, to kind of try to understand the systems they live in and try to find the ways to achieve change, a better change for everyone involved. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so this was Tonja Jerele from Ljubljana, Slovenia actually, and we were speaking about different topics mainly related to, basically to fight for a better society, but through fighting for women's rights. Thank you for your attention, and make sure to check the previous episodes if you haven't.